They called her the Marble Lady of Eridor. Before the fall, Lady Elara had been a creature of wind and sunlight, her laughter a melody that chased the hounds through the autumn fields, her grace a quiet envy in the candlelit ballroom. She had danced until dawn and ridden faster than her brother's squires. Now, she was marble, beautiful, cold, and utterly still. 2 years had passed since the riding accident, since the splintering crack of her own spine had become the sound that forever silenced the music of her life. Her legs, once so swift and sure, were now elegant strangers, unresponsive things of flesh and bone that tethered her to a high-backed chair of carved oak and velvet. Her world had shrunk to the dimensions of a room, its view of the castle gardens a daily mockery of the freedom she had lost. Her brother, Lord Valerus, now the Duke of Eridor since their father's passing, had a talent for cruelty that was as refined as his taste in wine. He saw her not as a sister but as a flaw in the perfect tapestry of his ambition. She was a constant, visible reminder of imperfection, a stain on the family's martial legacy. And so, he devised a unique torment, a way to use her very stillness for his own gain. The king was old, the court restless, and Valerus needed to display power, not vulnerability. The annual Feast of the Iron Moon was his chosen stage, and Elara his unwilling centerpiece. She was wheeled into the great hall, dressed in silks the color of a winter sky, her pale face a mask of practiced serenity. The lords and ladies fell silent, their whispers like the rustling of snakes in dry grass. Valerus, standing beside the king's dais, raised a goblet. "My lords, my ladies," he announced, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "You speak of loyalty, of steadfast devotion. I present to you the most constant lady in the kingdom. My sister, Elara. She will not dance away with your affections, nor flee from her duties. She is, you see, utterly." Unmoving, a wave of strained, sycophantic laughter rippled through the hall. Elara felt 1,000 eyes on her, each one a pinprick of humiliation. Her hands, hidden in the folds of her gown, clenched into fists, her knuckles white. This was not just a joke, it was a public execution of her dignity. Valerus let the moment hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. Such steadfastness should be rewarded, should it not? I have a need. My personal guard requires the finest steel, weapons of unparalleled strength and temper. A lifetime contract. The smith who can promise me this, who can arm my house for generations, will not be paid in gold or land. He gestured grandly towards Elara, a showman presenting his prize. He will be paid with her. A noble wife to grace his common home. A true marble statue for his hearth. The hall descended into a shocked, feverish murmur. He was selling her. His own sister, a daughter of the oldest bloodline in the province, was being bartered for swords. He had turned her into a grotesque commodity, her paralysis the punchline and her bloodline the perverse allure of the deal. The shame was a physical force, a hot, suffocating cloak that threatened to smother the very air from her lungs. She stared straight ahead, focusing on a tapestry of a long-dead queen on the far wall, praying for the floor to open and swallow her whole. At the back of the hall, half hidden in the shadows near the service doors, a man watched. His name was Kalen, the blacksmith of Greywood. He had been summoned not as a guest, but as a potential contractor, a master of his craft whose skills were whispered about in military circles. He was a man forged of fire and grief. The left side of his face and neck bore the story of his sorrow, a roadmap of scarred, melted skin from the forge fire that had claimed his wife 3 years prior. He was a creature of soot and silence, his heart a cold, hard thing, or so he believed. He had come only to hear the terms of the Duke's offer for steel, expecting to refuse the arrogant nobleman. But as he watched Lord Valerus parade his own sister's pain, something in Kalen's frozen heart cracked. He saw not a broken noblewoman, but a reflection of his own soul, trapped in a cage of tragedy. He saw the flicker of defiance in her eyes, a tiny flame refusing to be extinguished by the hurricane of her brother's cruelty. He looked at her, and he saw his Lyra, his own small daughter, silenced by the same fire that had scarred him. He saw a kindred spirit being publicly quartered, and an unfamiliar, protective fury rose in him like molten steel. Before anyone else could respond, before the sycophants could formulate their jests or the truly horrified could find their voices, Kalen stepped out of the shadows. His simple leather apron and soot-stained tunic were a stark contrast to the court silks and jewels. All eyes turned to him. "I accept the terms," he said, his voice low and rough, yet it carried across the hall with the clear ring of a hammer on an anvil. A gasp went through the crowd. Lord Valerus looked down his aristocratic nose, a smirk playing on his lips. "You? The blacksmith? You will provide the swords and armor for my entire household guard for the rest of your life, without payment." Kaelin's gaze did not waver. He looked past the Duke, directly at Ilara. "You will have your steel," he affirmed, his voice resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with titles. "And I will have the lady. The pact was sealed. It was a transaction of flesh and steel, of honor and disgrace." Valerus, triumphant in his own twisted game, clapped his hands, and the matter was settled. Ilara felt a strange, terrifying calm descend. She had fallen from the sky, and this scarred, solemn commoner was the earth that had risen up to meet her. The journey from the cold grandeur of Eridor Keep to the blacksmith's cottage was a descent into another world. The opulent carriage was replaced by a simple, sturdy cart, its bed softened with clean straw. Kaelin himself lifted her from her chair, his movement surprisingly gentle. His arms were corded with muscle, yet he held her as if she were made of spun glass, not marble. The sensory shock was profound. The air of the castle, which had always smelled of beeswax, lavender polish, and the faint, cloying scent of political decay, was replaced by the crisp, clean air of the countryside. As they drew closer to his home on the edge of the village, new scents crowded in: the sharp, metallic tang of the forge, the rich aroma of damp earth and burning oak, the homey smell of baking bread from a neighbor's oven. The rustle of her silk gown seemed absurdly out of place against the rough-hewn wood of the cart. She had been traded from a world of cold, smooth surfaces, polished stone, silver goblets, indifferent hands, to one of texture, grit, and surprising warmth. Kaelin's home was attached to the forge, a solid stone and timber structure nestled under the shade of an ancient oak. It was humble, yet immaculate. He carried her inside, across a worn threshold, and into the main room. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing light over simple, handmade furniture. It was the opposite of the keep's oppressive magnificence. Here, everything was functional, honest, and worn with care. Instead of leaving her in the main room, he carried her down a short hall to a small bedroom. It was sparse, but a clean linen sheet was turned down on the narrow bed, and a single, chipped vase on the windowsill held a spray of wild bluebells. The window looked out not on manicured, mocking gardens, but on a small, slightly overgrown patch of herbs and a view of the woods beyond. "I thought you might prefer some quiet," he said, his first words to her since the spectacle at the keep. He placed her gently on the edge of the bed. "My daughter's room is next door. She is quiet." He hesitated, the grief flickering in his eyes. "Her name is Lyra." He left her then, and a few moments later, a small girl with wide, haunted eyes and hair the color of flax appeared in the doorway. She held a wooden doll with a painted-on smile, a stark contrast to her own solemn expression. This was Lyra, the silent child. Ilara offered a small, tentative smile. The girl just watched her, her gaze unnervingly direct. Later that evening, Kaelin brought her a simple meal of stew and fresh bread on a wooden tray. As he set it down, he finally explained. "My lord," he began, then corrected himself. "Lady Ilara. I did not accept the Duke's bargain for a prize." He looked at his scarred hands. "I heard you were tutored by the finest scholars. That you read Latin and Greek, that you understand history and numbers. My Lyra, she has not spoken a word since the fire. Since her mother died. The healers can do nothing. They say the silence is in her soul, not her throat." He finally met her eyes, and she saw not a master, but a desperate father. "I do not need a wife. I need a teacher. I need someone to bring the world back to my daughter. I hoped you could." In that moment, Ilara's world tilted on its axis. He had not seen a cripple, a burden, a marble statue. He had seen a mind. He had seen a purpose for her that had nothing to do with her noble blood or her useless legs. For the first time since the accident, someone was asking her for something she could give. A tear, hot and sharp, escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of shame, but of a strange, fragile, and overwhelming hope. The next morning, she asked Callan to bring her a small stool and any books he might have. He had only a few, a worn copy of Fables, an almanac, and a heavy, leather-bound Bible. She began with the Fables. She wheeled her chair close to where Lyra sat on the floor, and in a clear, steady voice, she began to read. She read of clever foxes and foolish kings, of brave mice and gentle giants. Lyra just watched, silent, but for the first time, her eye seemed to hold not just sorrow, but curiosity. Day after day, Elara read. She pointed to the letters, sounding them out. She drew them with a piece of charcoal on a slate Callan provided. She was no longer just the marble lady. She was a teacher. She had a purpose, a small, vital flame in the humble heart of a blacksmith's cottage. The days bled into weeks, weaving a new kind of tapestry for their small, wounded family. A quiet rhythm established itself, as comforting and steady as the beat of Callan's hammer from the forge next door. Elara managed the cottage from her chair, her sharp mind bringing an order and gentle beauty to the space it had lacked. She taught Lyra her letters in the mornings and read to her in the afternoons. Callan would return from the forge at dusk, his face streaked with soot, his body weary, and find a hot meal waiting and a quiet peace settled over his home. One evening, as a cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves outside, Elara found the courage to ask. Callan, she began softly, as he mended a leather strap by the firelight. Your scars. If it is not too painful to speak of, he stopped his work, his hands going still. He looked into the flames, and for a moment, he was back in the inferno. A bellows burst, he said, his voice a low rumble. The fire, it was everywhere in an instant. I got Lyra out first. But my wife, Elspeth. I went back for her. I was too late. The simple, unadorned horror of it hung in the air between them. He then looked at her, his gaze full of a shared understanding of loss. And your legs, my lady. It was her turn to stare into the fire, to see the flash of a startled horse, the blur of green canopy, the final, sickening impact. A hunt, she whispered. My favorite mare, startled by a snake. We both fell. She did not get up again, and neither did a part of me. They did not speak of it again, but the bridge was built. In the shared space of their traumas, a profound empathy took root, a bond stronger than any pity or gratitude. The spark that ignited this quiet bond into something more came with the violence of a late autumn storm. The sky, which had been a bruised purple all afternoon, finally broke open. Rain lashed against the cottage in furious sheets, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. Elara was in her small room, trying to read by candlelight, when a sudden crack of thunder shook the house to its foundations. Seconds later, a steady drip began from the ceiling, landing directly onto her blanket. The drip quickened into a stream. Before she could call out, the door burst open and Callan was there, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the hall. The old thatch gave way, he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. Without another word, he strode to her bed. The leak was becoming a steady pour, soaking her mattress. We have to move you. He didn't wait for a reply. He scooped her into his arms, his rain-soaked shirt cold against her skin for a moment before his sheer body heat radiated through it. He carried her out into the main room, near the warmth of the hearth. As a brilliant fork of lightning illuminated the room, freezing them in a stark, white flash, their eyes met. She was in his arms, her head resting against the solid wall of his chest. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her ear. It was a moment of profound, non-sexual intimacy. He was not just a protector, he was her shelter. And in the safety of his arms, she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire, a feeling she had thought was dead forever. He held her gaze for a second longer than necessary before gently placing her in a large armchair, her legs covered with a dry, woolen blanket. Neither of them spoke, but the air was now charged with a new, unspoken language. From that night on, their world was filled with this silent language. It was in the way he would leave a particularly beautiful wildflower on the tray with her morning tea. It was in the way she would save him the last piece of the honey cake he loved. It was in the shared smiles they exchanged over Lyra's head as the little girl finally began to use the charcoal slate to draw not just letters, but pictures, a house, a flower, a man with a hammer, and a lady in a chair. Lyra became the conduit for their growing affection. She would take Ilara's hand and pull her chair closer to the forge door, so she could watch Kalen work, his muscles moving with a fluid power that was mesmerizing. Then she would run back to Kalen, tugging on his leather apron, and point back towards the cottage, a silent insistence that he come inside for a moment. They were a family, forged not of blood or law, but of quiet care and necessity, slowly mending each other in the gentle crucible of their shared home. But the world they had built their fragile shelter against could not be held at bay forever. Lord Valerus was not a man to be forgotten. Whispers reached him in his cold keep, whispers that his cast-off sister was not withering in shame, but thriving. That the blacksmith's silent child was seen smiling. This quiet happiness was an affront to him, a negation of his power. His cruelty, once a matter of public theatre, became a slow, grinding siege. He began by using his influence at court to have Kalen's most lucrative contracts with other nobles abruptly cancelled, citing concerns about quality orders for plows, hinges, and gates from the surrounding farms dried up, as people feared incurring the Duke's wrath. Malicious gossip, seeded by Valerus's agents, began to poison the village well. The woman was a cripple, a curse. The blacksmith was a fool, bewitched by her noble name. They were shunned in the market. Shopkeepers suddenly had no flour to sell them. Old friends averted their eyes. Their small island of peace was surrounded by a rising tide of hostility. The siege broke into open confrontation on a grey, drizzling morning. Lord Valerus arrived at the forge, flanked by 2 of his household guards, their swords, forged by Kalen's own hands, gleaming at their hips. He dismounted, his fine leather boots sinking into the muddy yard with a look of supreme distaste. "Brother," Ilara said, her voice laced with ice. She had wheeled her chair to the doorway, placing herself between him and the home's interior. Valerus sneered. "I see you have grown accustomed to this hovel. I have come to correct my error. This farce has gone on long enough. A convent has agreed to take you in. You will live out your days in prayer and obscurity, as is fitting." He took a step forward, but Kalen moved to stand beside her chair, a silent, immovable wall. "She is my wife," Kalen said, his voice dangerously low. "Her place is here." Valerus laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Your wife?" "The contract was for steel, Smith. You have failed to deliver on recent quotas, what with your other business failing. The contract is void. She is my blood, my property to dispose of." It was then that Ilara's spirit, reforged in the fires of Kalen's hearth, blazed forth. "I am not property," she said, her voice ringing with a power that made even Valerus pause. "I am not a sack of grain to be traded, nor a broken toy to be hidden away. This man has shown me more honor in 3 months than you have shown me in a lifetime. This is my home. You are not welcome here." Her defiance, so unexpected and potent, stunned Valerus into a simmering rage. He left with a final, venomous threat: "You will regret this. I will ruin you both. You will come crawling to me, begging for the mercy of the convent walls." His threat was not idle. In the weeks that followed, the vice tightened. A tax collector arrived with a list of fictional back taxes owed by Kalen. A shipment of coal he had paid for was mysteriously lost on the road. They were being starved out, pushed to the absolute brink of ruin. One night, sitting at the table with a pile of unpaid bills and a near-empty larder, the weight of their situation became unbearable. The fire in the hearth was low, mirroring the fading hope in the room. Ilara's composure finally broke, and a single, silent tear fell onto the ledger. Kalen reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. His scarred skin was rough, but his touch was the gentlest thing she had ever known. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he had long suppressed. "I have nothing left to offer you. No wealth, no protection. All I have is this." He brought her hand to his chest, placing it over his heart. I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love again." In the depths of their shared despair, his confession was a lifeline. She looked at him, her own heart aching with a fierce, protective love. "And I love you, Kaelin," she whispered back. "They can take the house, the forge, everything. They cannot take this." Their love, confessed in the face of utter ruin, was no longer a fragile shelter. It was their armor, their weapon, their final act of rebellion. In the quiet that followed their confession, something shifted in Elara. The fear remained, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, clear-minded fury. Her brother had underestimated her. He had seen only her broken body, never her mind. She spent the next day in deep thought, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Kaelin," she said that evening, her voice firm. "Bring me the contract. The one you made with my brother." He retrieved the rolled parchment from a locked chest. She unrolled it on the table, her finger tracing the elegant, merciless script. She read it once, then twice, her knowledge of noble law and phrasing, drilled into her since childhood, coming alive. "Here," she said, her finger jabbing at a specific clause. He was too arrogant, too sure of himself. The contract stipulated that the weapons were for the exclusive use of the Duke of Eridor's personal household guard. "How many men are in his personal guard, Kaelin?" He thought for a moment. 50, perhaps 60 at most. Elara looked at the forged ledger, which she had meticulously maintained. "And how many swords and daggers have you delivered to him in the last 3 months?" Kaelin's eyes widened as he did the mental calculation. Over 200. A slow, dawning realization spread across his face. "That's enough to arm a small army," he breathed. Elara nodded, a grim satisfaction in her eyes. "Precisely. He is not outfitting his guard. He is secretly arming mercenaries. And I think I know why. The king is old and has no direct heir. Valeru's plans to seize the throne. Their rebellion now had a strategy, a weapon far deadlier than any sword, the truth. But they needed allies. Their salvation came from an unexpected source. Father Michael, the old village priest who had known Kaelin since he was a boy, had watched the Duke's persecution with a heavy heart. He despised Valeru's avarice and cruelty. Kaelin, swallowing his pride, went to him, not for absolution, but for aid. He laid out the evidence, the contract, the ledger, the impossible numbers. The priest's eyes, usually gentle, hardened with conviction. "The Duke's ambition is a cancer on this land," he declared. "The king's cousin, Lord Grenville, is the hand of the king. He is an honorable man, and he is visiting the monastery at Highcliffe, only a day's ride from here. I can get you an audience." The plan was perilous. If they were wrong, or if Grenville was loyal to Valeru's, they would be signing their own death warrants. But it was their only chance. 2 days later, in a sparse, cold room in the Highcliffe Monastery, they faced Lord Grenville. He was an imposing man with weary, intelligent eyes. Elara, seated in her chair, was the one who spoke. She did not plead or accuse. With calm, unshakable logic, she laid out the facts. She presented the contract as evidence of her brother's character, the ledger as proof of his actions, and her own story as a testament to his ruthlessness. Kaelin stood beside her, his presence a silent confirmation of her words. Grenville listened intently, his fingers steepled, his gaze moving from Elara's articulate face to Kaelin's honest one. When she had finished, he was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded slowly. "The Duke of Eridor has long been a subject of concern. Your testimony gives shape to our fears." He summoned a scribe. Valeru's was to be summoned to the regional capital under the pretense of a council meeting. The trap was set. It was a battle to be fought not with steel, but with ink and truths, orchestrated by the woman Valeru's had dismissed as a piece of broken marble. The downfall of Lord Valeru's was swift and absolute. Confronted by Lord Grenville, the King's Guard, and the damning evidence of his own contract and Kaelin's ledger, his arrogance crumbled. Investigations quickly uncovered his cache of illegal arms and his network of mercenaries. His treason was laid bare for all to see. He was stripped of his titles, his lands, his wealth. In a final, fitting act of poetic justice, he was exiled, sent away in disgrace, a man left with nothing but his own bitter ambition. He became a mirror of the fate he had designed for his sister, publicly shamed, stripped of status, and utterly broken. The news reached the small cottage at Greywood not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet arrival of a royal messenger. The messenger bore a proclamation from the king. In it, Caelan's debts were forgiven, and he was granted a royal charter, naming him the exclusive armsmaker for the king's own forces. His reputation was not just restored, it was magnified tenfold. The proclamation also contained a personal offer for Ilara. Her family titles, lands, and a portion of her brother's confiscated wealth were to be restored to her. She could return to the world that had discarded her, powerful and rich once more. She read the parchment, then looked at Caelan, at the humble home that had become her sanctuary, at the forge that was the sound of her security. She looked at Lyra, who was now holding her hand. She took the royal seal and quill from the messenger and, on the bottom of the proclamation, wrote her reply. She politely, but firmly, refused the titles and the lands. "My life is here," she wrote. "My wealth is here." They chose not to reclaim an old life, but to continue building their new one, a kingdom of 2 rooms and a forge, built on a foundation of love and mutual respect. Their home, once a symbol of her fall, was now the sigil of their earned happiness. That evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, the 3 of them stood in the doorway of the forge. The air was clean, the future uncluttered. Caelan's arm was around Ilara's shoulders as she sat in her chair, his hand resting near her heart. Lyra stood between them, holding one of Caelan's calloused fingers and one of Ilara's smooth ones. She looked up at the vibrant sky, then at Caelan, then at Ilara. A small, wondrous smile touched her lips. She opened her mouth, and a sound, a real word, emerged for the first time in 3 years, clear and perfect in the evening quiet. "Papa," she said, looking at Caelan. Then she turned her bright, adoring eyes to Ilara, squeezed her hand, and spoke the word that healed the last of their wounds and made their family whole. "Mama." The sound was a rebirth, a promise, the final, triumphant note in their symphony of survival. True nobility, they learned, is not a thing of blood or birthright, passed down through generations like a silver crown. It is a thing of the spirit, forged in the fiery crucible of hardship and tempered with compassion. True worth is not measured by the lands you own or the titles you hold, but by the honor you show to others and the love you are willing to give. Ilara, the marble lady, had been discarded as worthless because her body was broken. But in the heart of a scarred and grieving blacksmith, she found that her true strength, her intellect, her resilience, and her capacity to love, were unbreakable. Their story is a testament that the most beautiful things are often found in the most broken of places, and that the greatest kingdoms are not built of stone and power, but are quietly forged in the loving, beating hearts of a family.